Well, we should be live right now on Mobazen Live, so I'm coming to you live early Saturday morning, whether it's by the dawn's early light or underneath that crescent moon I'm looking at. Here we go. Continuing on the introduction to prominent Anti-Mormonism Mormon truthers and LDS apologists on YouTube as YouTubers. Might be presumptuous to consider myself as part of that, but since I'm doing the video, I'll just include myself. And I have put a prolific amount up this year. Whether or not anybody thinks it's any good, I know a few people do, but don't have a ton of views. At any rate, I'm going to, in this, what I'm intending to do at this moment is get into a little bit more detail on certain people that I maybe briefly introduced and some of their work on the anti-Mormonism side, as well as exposing or showing expositions, which some of us have done, on the apologists' actual tactics, which are really quite deceptive. And so I'm going to take the liberty of displaying that. And first off, I'm going to go with Flackerman in one of my favorite videos that he has done. So I introduced him in part 1, so this is part 2. And I'm going to get right into his video called Tactics of a Mormon Apologist, where he's showing on video what Scott Gordon, head of Fair Mormon, which I call Unfair Mormon, actually does to distort things and use, very deceptive tactics. Then we'll see me, as far as some things that I've done, showing similar situations on LDS.org, Gospel Topics Essays especially, and take a look at Shawn McCraney. At least that's the plan. So here we go. We're going to jump into Flackerman's video here. I'll do a little commentary because there are issues that he discusses that I'd like to comment on as well. I don't always share exactly the same view as Flackerman, but I'll make that evident here. He does a terrific job. I'm fully endorsing the efforts that he makes. And he's got a lot more views than me, so, hey. Whoop. Speak.
Meet Scott Gordon. Scott is a Mormon apologist and president of the Foundation for Apologetic Information and Research, also known as FAIR. In a recent presentation at Utah Valley University, Scott talked about the world of Mormon apologetics and criticized those who claim that the Mormon Church hides or distorts information about its early leaders and history. Scott addressed the issues of Joseph Smith's polygamy and the translation method of the Book of Mormon.
Another common tactic is to claim the church is hiding the information. 2 quick examples. Many are upset when they learn that Joseph Smith practiced plural marriage, or they learn that Joseph Smith may have used a hat and a seer stone while translating the Book of Mormon.
You think? Discovering that the translation method of the Book of Mormon was for Joseph Smith to place his seer stone into a hat, bury his face into the hat, gaze into his magical rock, and dictate the text to a scribe was quite a shock to me. Growing up in the church, and through its seminary and institute systems, I was always taught that Joseph Smith translated the characters on the golden plates to produce the Book of Mormon. The church has published numerous paintings of Joseph Smith looking directly at the golden plates, running his fingers over the engravings while dictating to a scribe. So for some reason, when a member finds out about the rock and a hat method, it upsets them. Just about every former believing member I have had the good fortune to talk to has told me that this was an issue for them. While many more members, maybe even most, are aware that Joseph Smith introduced the practice of polygamy, very few of them know any of the details of how he practiced the principle. For instance, LDS historians have documented that Joseph Smith married at least 33 plural wives, most of whom were kept a secret from his first wife, Emma. 11 of these women were already married, and 9 of them were teenagers, with 2 of them being only 14 years old. In my experience, it is the discovery of these details that upsets people.
The typical claim is the church has been hiding this or has been dishonest about it.
Scott is implying that this criticism is false, and that the church has been open and honest about these issues. Well, if this were true, then why would all of these members encountering this information be getting upset?
Here's a short list of where you can read about Joseph Smith's marriages.
You are right, Scott. That is a short list. What do we have? 6 references in 39 years? That is once every 6.5 years, just long enough for that information to fall down the old memory hole. So let's see just how open and honest the LDS Church is being about these issues, and check out Scott's list.
Of course, we have a lesson manual in 2007.
Alright, this source says, this book also does not discuss plural marriage. Hold on a minute, Scott. This is your reference? Your first reference? You are using a passage that states that plural marriage is not supposed to be discussed as evidence that the church is being open and honest about the subject? Really? Well, this source does go on to say that the doctrine of plural marriage was revealed to Joseph in 1831. It does not say whether or not Joseph Smith actually married any extra wives or performed any plural marriages. It only lets the reader know that a number of plural marriages happened to be performed by someone during his lifetime.
Ensign 1992.
Well, this article does state that Emma was deeply hurt when Joseph told her they were going to have to live the law of plural marriage. It does not actually say whether they entered into polygamy before Joseph died. We cannot learn anything about Joseph Smith's plural marriages from this source, only that he hurt his wife's feelings.
Ensign 1989.
While this reference does tell us that Joseph taught the knights the doctrine, there's that word again, doctrine, of plural marriage, it tells us nothing about Joseph Smith's plural wives. Scott, did you bother to read any of these articles?
Ensign 1978.
Finally, here we go. This source does contain a single detail about Joseph's polygamy, the name of a wife. Of course, it fails to mention she was 17 and Joseph was 36 when they got hitched. Several weeks after they were wed, Joseph wrote a letter to Sarah Ann while he was in hiding from the law on the outskirts of Nauvoo. He wrote, "My feelings are so strong for you since what has passed lately between us. It seems as if I could not long live this way. I know it is the will of God that you should comfort me now in this time of affliction. The only thing to be careful of is to find out when Emma comes. Then you cannot be safe. But when she is not here, there is the most perfect safety. Burn this letter as soon as you read it. Keep all locked up in your breasts. You will pardon me for my earnestness on this subject when you consider how lonesome I must be." Oh, he was lonely. "I think Emma won't come tonight. If she don't fail to come tonight." I wonder why this letter didn't make the article. Seems evident to me that Joseph was keeping this relationship
a little covert. Sounds to me like somebody had a little burning in the bosom doctrine going on.
like he did with most of them, a secret from his first wife, Emma. Secret teen brides? Who knew? Well, not me.
Inside 1977.
Again, this source does not say that Joseph practiced polygamy, just that the practice was started during his lifetime by somebody. Scott, why do you keep using sources that do not support your claim? One thing this article does recognize is that the practice was kept a secret, albeit a poorly kept one, until it was public.
Hey, I just want to interrupt real quickly here. Using using references that don't support your claim. I'm just going to briefly mention the fact that in the first vision, 9 versions of the first vision video I did, I noted in there within the text on LDS.org that what we find is a reference that is given, is reference and a footnote, a quote from William Smith, Joseph's little brother, saying how we should believe him because he was so truthful. And it's in reference to the first vision, supposedly. However, when we look it up, and by the way, there's no hyperlink, they make it difficult, but you do a web search and you find out that the reference there to William has nothing at all to do with an 1820 alleged first vision. All of William's references begin with Joseph Smith starting any sort of spiritual quest and the family being involved in any sort of revivals that were going on in the area in 1823. There's one brief mention of a possibility of some of them occurring in the area in 1822, but the references to the family attending are in 1823. And so the reference was completely fake, and that's my point. they make it look like they're documenting something, and actually it was documenting the fact that the 1820 baloney was never known to the Smith family. They never heard of any such thing. Fake documenting. Watch for it. Don't take these footnotes for granted. Check them out. All right, back to Flackerman.
Announced by Brigham Young in 1852. At that time, there was a section in the Mormon scripture, the Doctrine and Covenants, that denied the practice of polygamy and stated that monogamy was the law of the church. That section remained in the LDS canon for a couple of more decades after this announcement. This section was used by leaders of the church, some of whom were already polygamists, to deny that the Mormons were practicing polygamy when attempting to gain new converts. It was also illegal in the territory. This meant that Young and everyone...
Hate to keep interrupting. Yeah, trying to get new converts and saying that polygamy was not a thing. If we research the church's history, we can notice, and I've got it in an honesty video where I was taking some information. I believe it was Richard Packham that had published this, or at any rate, it's not like he made it up. He's got his references. But John Taylor, who was third president of the church, was on a mission in, I'll say Europe as a broad-based comment, because it could be either France or England. And the concern was there because word had reached that polygamy was going on in Utah. And so he, I believe he created a piece of church proselytizing literature which absolutely denied that polygamy existed. John Taylor had 12 wives at the time. So, talk about honesty from the brethren. Yeah, this isn't anything new. All right, back to Flackerman.
Else practicing the principle were breaking the law and thus violating their own articles of faith.
New Era, 1973.
Nothing is said at all about Joseph Smith practicing plural marriage in this passage. Scott is really reaching for references at this point. However, it is interesting to note that Joseph claims to have gotten these authoritative keys to perform celestial and plural marriage from an angelic Noah. This supposedly happened in the Kirtland Temple on April 3rd, 1836. Joseph's first documented plural wife was the 16-year-old Fanny Alger in 1833. The first article in Scott's list stated that Joseph received the revelation to start practicing plural marriage as early as 1831. So why would God instruct and allow Joseph to practice polygamy many years before giving him the authority to do so?
And of course, there's always the D&C section 132 that talks about plural marriage.
While this section does talk about polygamy, when it is justified, when it is adultery, and how any wife who objects to her husband taking on more plural wives will be destroyed by God, nice. It does not state that Joseph had entered into any polygamous marriages, or give any details on how it was being lived. In the church's Sunday school manual that teaches about this section, plural marriage is not covered. The teacher is explicitly instructed at the end of the lesson that this subject should not be the focus of the lesson, and is given a couple of quotes they can use to deflect and dismiss any questions that may arise in class. So upon review, we see that only one of the 7 sources that Scott provided contain any specific information about how Joseph Smith practiced the doctrine.
And what he just mentioned there about the instructor's manual is very telling. That is classic mind control. That is information control being exercised through the leaders of the church instructing the instructors to get rid of questions that would lead people to think about certain things that they don't want them to think about. So they're limiting the information they've got. They're actually trying to structure the thoughts that are going on about this subject. Both are bite model characteristics, information control and behavior control. So we see these aspects of mind control. If you've read anything about the bite model, behavior, information, thought, and emotional control exercised in high control organizations utilizing these tactics and technology, then you can recognize these things more readily when you see them being used rather covertly in the church, where seminary, Sunday school, primary teachers, whoever's teaching these things, really isn't even aware that they're being manipulated into doing these things, to deflecting students' questions. And I actually showed that in that same video I referenced earlier, the First Vision business, because in one of the many pages that are involved with the First Vision, which I show on there, some assuming you know nothing about there being multiple versions and so going with the official version, or others that so much as going so far as to have the Gospel Topics essay on it, where they try to explain that Joseph Smith was just emphasizing different points of the vision to various audiences and ignoring the fact that he actually contradicts himself multiple times. To the one where they, in a fairly new one, where they actually blend various aspects of several different versions of the vision and try to create one composite narrative. They even made like a 6-minute video on it, so it can become real to your mind. Just as pictures do it, videos do it even better. They present evidence to your subconscious mind and to your conscious mind, and especially what goes to the subconscious directly is presented as evidence, just like when you see the picture of Moroni with Joseph Smith alone in his bedroom, which is obviously completely false, since he shared his bedroom and even the bed with some of his brothers. So you've got that in your head. It goes straight through, and that's what's been done on LDS.org to try to make these things plausible in our minds, to settle us from questioning. And I also wanted to mention on section 132, where Flackerman is mentioning some things here. What he didn't really mention were a couple of things, of course, because he's not trying to go over the whole section, but he talks about the wives being destroyed if they don't go along with it. My understanding of some of these things is not that all women were subject to being overridden in this thing, but he who held the keys of this authority. In other words, Joseph Smith. So he was exempt from the law of Sarah, as he states it, or as he says that Jesus is stating it in the Revelation. And so Emma basically can't do a damn thing about it. She's stuck with it. She just has the choice to obey or be damned and destroyed. Whereas women who are involved, married to brethren of lesser standing in the priesthood, may indeed need to approve of their husbands taking on a second wife and have the opportunity to even make selection of said wives. The Revelation also does not in any way endorse taking other men's wives. It specifically denotes virgins, which would, by definition, tend to exclude anyone who was already married, assuming marriages had been consummated. So, multiple things in that are just so troublesome for the LDS apologists, but they're skilled at ignoring them and focusing on other things to divert our attention from real issues. One more such issue would be that when we deal with Brian Hales making those sorts of assertions as an LDS apologist, that Joseph never consummated these marriages, especially those that he asserts he never consummated that involved other men's wives, like about 11 of them or so, I believe, are shown as sealed to Joseph Smith, basically as a cover by the church, that he was actually married to them. And Flackerman uses the term married or hitched. However, it was illegal in every state, and according to people like Sarah Pratt and Joseph Jackson, it was really about the spiritual wife system, and this whole business of actually being married in any sense of the word was brought on later when Joseph Smith had difficulty convincing certain of the sisters to follow what he was teaching out of Hosea chapter 3, having to do with spiritual wifism. Okay, let's go back.
Polygamy. While the church hints at polygamy here and there, it is not something that can be openly discussed at church or in the church materials. The church manuals specifically state that the subject is to be avoided and not discussed. Is it any wonder, then, why members, when they learn about the details of Joseph Smith's polygamy, the young teen brides, the polyandry, are disturbed by this information? What do you expect, Scott?
As far as translation with the stone in the hat,
Okay, so here we have 5 references in 38 years, or 1 every 7.5 years. Forgive me, Scott, if I'm still not impressed by that. But in order to be fair, let's see if any of these references are any better than the previous set of obfuscation.
Ensign 1997.
This article does mention a seer stone and something called a Urim and Thummim. However, it does not say anything about how they were used or mention anything about a hat. Now, if I recall correctly, the Urim and Thummim was used to produce the first 116 pages that Martin Harris lost. As a result of losing those pages, the golden plates and the Urim and Thummim were taken from Joseph Smith by the custodial angel. When the translation process started back up again, Joseph started using the seer stone he had previously found while digging a well. This was the same magic rock he had used while employed to find buried treasure in the 1820s, of which they never found any. Since the Book of Mormon we have was not translated by the use of the Urim and Thummim, any reference to these crystal stones set in a bow and attached to a breastplate is not applicable.
Ensign 1993.
Okay.
Interrupting here again. On the point of the Urim and Thummim, as we're calling the 2 clear stones at this point, these are taken out of the book, and no one ever saw them. People were accustomed to seeing Joseph's brown rock, which is not the rock that he just showed, but not accustomed to seeing the so-called interpreters found in Ether chapter 3 in the Book of Mormon. They, like the golden plates, were actually never seen by anyone's natural or physical eyes. Just a coincidence. Okay.
This is a good source. Apostle Nelson quotes David Whitmer, who describes exactly how the translation process went down. Score 1 for the openness of the church.
Ensign 1998.
While this source mentions the Urim and Thummim, it does not mention the seer stone or a hat. The reader could not have learned anything about the translation process that produced our Book of Mormon from this article.
Ensign 1997.
Okay, this is another good source. But notice it is the same David Whitmer quote that was in Elder Nelson's article that we examined earlier. At least we know the church considers Whitmer's account as valid. So why do they continue to teach and publish pictures of Joseph translating the characters on the golden plates when the church knows that's not how it happened? Why are they teaching something that's contrary to the historical record?
Sounds a little dishonest.
And The Friend, 1974, that talks about that.
This article does mention that Joseph was reading the text that would appear on the surface of his seer stone, but it says nothing about a hat. It is interesting that Scott's sources are evidence of a tight translation of the Book of Mormon. This means it wasn't just the ideas, but the exact words and grammar that were of divine origin and shown to Joseph Smith. All he had to do was read the words as they appeared. It makes one wonder why a book that was created in such a way would require so many edits. If this really was how the text was produced, then there shouldn't have been any errors in what Mormon...
You're right, Flackerman. And especially after Jesus himself had endorsed it. We've got what's said supposedly by Jesus in Doctrine and Covenants section 1 about it being translated by the gift and power of God, speaking directly through Joseph Smith. And then there's Doctrine and Covenants section 17, verse 6, where it's Jesus speaking through Joseph Smith again and says something like, and I've documented this elsewhere, you can easily look it up in the D&C, I tell you, as the Lord your God liveth, it is true. 3,913 corrections later, it's still true, right? Including taking out Mary was the mother of God.
It's considered to be the most correct book on earth.
Corrected.
So we see that only 2 out of the 5 sources that Scott provides give the reader any indication that the translation process of the Book of Mormon consisted of Joseph Smith gazing at his magical seer stone, which was placed inside of a hat. Once again, most of Gordon's references do not support his claim. It seems to me that he is really stretching to find anything that will support his position that the church is being open and honest with its membership. Anything will do, as long as...
A major point being the fact that no gold plates are required when you're looking into a hat, and as David Whitmer and Emma Smith said, the plates weren't even in the house at the time.
Is kind of in the ballpark, so he can put that reference in a list. He can then show that list to people without discussing anything in particular and say, see, the church does publish articles about this stuff. If you didn't know about it, you were not paying attention. You were not studying properly, or you were just reading too much anti-Mormon material.
That's it.
The church is not the problem. It is you.
You're the problem.
I have noticed this is a common tactic of the LDS apologist. Blame the person asking the question or having doubts.
Sounds like the
It is
Moonies.
always their fault. The church is blameless. These apologists are not interested in what is true, only in finding some way, any way, to make the pieces fit so that the church can be protected. This is why Scott had to use such flimsy examples. They are all he had. But hey, why should you listen to me? I am one of those untrustworthy anti-Mormon guys, right? Okay, let's go.
Exactly. Discrediting people through character assassination and association with those things which have already been established in the minds of the people to be lacking in credibility. That's why they label people like Flackerman or me as anti-Mormon, apostates. Let's think about the song Praise to the Man. Traitors and tyrants now fight him in vain. Isn't that interesting? You know what else I've noticed having to do with mind control and information control in that very song happens to be the next verse. Mingling with gods, or next stanza, who knows. Mingling with gods, he can plan for his brethren. Death cannot conquer the hero again. So there we've got the doctrine of the plurality of gods. May not go over well with, recent converts who've been raised in Catholicism. Thus, the Spanish version, which goes to all of Latin America, says nothing of the sort. Check the hymnal in Spanish if you can read it. Yeah, it says nothing about mingling with gods, believe me. All right.
To the official church website, josephsmith.net, and see exactly how open and honest the church is about these issues. Okay, here we are. Let's do a search for polygamy. 0 hits. Let's try plural marriage. 0 hits again. Let's look at Emma Smith. Wow, 73. Well, maybe it's so to talk about his wives. Let's look for wife number 2, Fanny Alger. 0 hits again. What about the wife who Scott referenced earlier, Sarah Ann? Oh, still 0. So, just how open and honest is the church being about Joseph Smith's polygamy, Scott? Just to be fair, let's try seer stone hat. 0 hits. Alright, let's just try seer stone. Well, it looks like there is one link that references D&C 28. In that section of the Doctrine and Covenants, Joseph tells Hiram Page that the revelations he was getting through his stone, hey, more people had stones, are not coming from God, but they're coming from Satan. This is nothing about the book of...
Let's just remind everyone that Hiram Page happened also to be one of the 11 witnesses of the Book of Mormon. Even though, when we really look carefully, we notice that every signature was done in the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery. Just something to think about.
Mormon translation process, so still nothing. Alright, let's search for translating golden plates. There we go, 14 hits. Alright, let's try translating Book of Mormon. Whoa, 96 hits. So the website is all set up to tell people about the translation process of the golden plates into the Book of Mormon without any mention of the seer stone or a hat. Scott, why is the church, which you are claiming is being honest and open about these issues, not telling people about the Book of Mormon translation process on their website?
Too many members believe that we teach history in Sunday school classes. That is not what we do. We use examples from history to teach gospel principles.
Semantics.
You can learn about history from a book about history, not from a church lesson manual.
Well,
hate to say so, but it's not just church history that's been rewritten and obfuscated. When we look at the history of the United States, that gets very, very evident. As long as we're not using correlated materials from our educational institutions.
It's too bad that the writers of the Sunday School Manual disagree with you, Scott. The introduction to the Doctrine and Covenants in Church History Manual says, as you study the Doctrine and Covenants and church history, and later it says, this study guide has been prepared to help you study the Doctrine and Covenants and church history. So, the Sunday School Manual that teaches church history says that we are supposed to use it to study church history. Are historical examples used to teach principles? Of course they are. Is that mutually exclusive with learning about church history? Not at all. So why would Scott take such a strong position against what the church is claiming to do with its curriculum? Well, when creating the curriculum for instruction manuals for the church, the leaders have established a policy that only the faith-promoting stories, doctrines, and historical events are to be mentioned. Nothing that might reflect poorly on the church or its leaders is to be included.
Sounds fair and balanced.
In his instruction to church education teachers, Elder Packer gives a warning to those who do not edit their writings and teachings in a faith-promoting way. Those who publicly talk or write about advanced history and the difficult doctrines may face discipline and have in fact been excommunicated. As a result, there is a fear to write or teach about the meatier and difficult aspects of the church. As a result of that, the average member has only been taught the correlated and heavily edited version of church history and doctrine. Scott knows this and is trying to defend the gigantic holes in the history being taught to the membership by stating that members are wrong to expect the church to teach them history in the church history course. Once again, it's always the members who are at fault. The church is blameless.
You're lacking faith.
But sometimes members happen to run into information about the church that is contrary to what they have been taught. They may encounter articles, TV, news programs, or something on the internet that contain information about the church that they didn't know. This causes people to dig a little deeper and find out more. This is how it was in my case. Over the years, I had collected many problematic issues to which I had no answer. Instead of trying to resolve them, I put them on the back shelf of my mind. After a couple of decades, I found that I could no longer ignore these questions. My shelf came crashing down, and I needed to find answers. I started my search for truth with the desire to be a defender of the church, to strengthen my faith. I needed to find the honest solutions that I was sure existed. However, as my research progressed, I had to acknowledge that I did not know as much as I thought I did, and that this new information I had encountered was more accurate than I originally thought. My excuses started feeling less and less valid, and I was stretching for ways to make the pieces fit. The more I searched, the more elusive the desired answers became, and I was forced to accept that it was my preconceived beliefs that were in error.
And what Flackerman's relating here is something that is common to many of us, as we try desperately to pound a round peg into a square hole that was obviously undersized. We tried very hard to mesh reality and factual evidence with what we had been taught in the church, in the correlated lesson materials where verses are cherry-picked and placed into theme-based lessons, where history is even rewritten and otherwise obfuscated in order to fit as well as possible into the narrative that an all-knowing, unchanging, righteous, loving, merciful God guides the LDS Church through just and holy, though imperfect, men, whom we call prophets, seers, and revelators.
I found that when the devout member learns of some of the hidden doctrines in advanced history, they tend to feel deceived or lied to. Because of the church policy of only teaching the faith-promoting things, some feel they have made many of the most important decisions of their lives based on inaccurate or incomplete information. This causes more angst, injury, and loss of faith than do the issues themselves. It does more damage than anything else could, and can result in a total loss of faith. People can handle the humanity of their leaders, and teachings that evolve as we gain a greater understanding of whatever.
Actually, Flackerman, the stark contradictions that we find, including Jesus lying in the LDS scriptures, as he, by definition, is lying when he contradicts his own narrative, his own story, time after time, is in and of itself reason to completely realize that if God is not honest, and he actually does not fit the definition given in Ether chapter 3, where the brother of Jared is saying, "Thou art a God of truth and canst not lie." Ironically, right before Jesus lies to him and tells him he's the first that's ever seen him, 1,000 years after we have so-called records of him being face to face with Enoch and actually living with Enoch and his people in Zion.
What the people I have talked to are most offended by is by being deceived with lies and half-truths that paint a picture of what the brethren want us to believe, not what really is. Scott, rather than taking part in this deception by blaming those who have been hurt, you should join those of us who stand for honesty and integrity and
Yeah, he should. And I want to bring up the fact that the very things that they are doing here, which Flackerman has just pointed out with the language of half-truths, and deception is a word that I would use, those are the very words that we hear describing people like me, people like Flackerman, and others as teaching half-truths and distortions. That, however, is exactly what the LDS apologists and leaders are doing, and a thorough evaluation of the factual information is what will reveal it to you. Not fancy talk from apologists, and not necessarily me or Flackerman. But as you can see, Flackerman is showing evidence, clear, indisputable evidence, in my view, of what is actually going on, and I'll show more of that in some of excerpts of mine that I'll do, and some Shawn McCraney. It's one thing to do fancy talking, to speak much flattery unto the people, and to be a man of many words, as Scott Gordon, Dan Peterson, and Brian Hales are. And another, to be straightforward and honest, like Flackerman and I am. Okay, I'm not an English major. How about Dan Vogel?
Exposed to deception. The church can evolve into something far greater than it currently is, and your organization should stop trying to defend it at all costs and start helping to transform it.
All right, Flackerman. Well, that was pretty good, huh? I thought so. Well, 31% left on the old phone here. We got time for a little more. Let's go for a little more. I'm going to jump into some of my stuff here. I've included McCraney on some of my things. I might have to go a part 3 with this, depending on my schedule here. Tell you what, I'm going to pop in here to the internet, where I've already got some stuff loaded up here. Excuse me. Oh, okay. Well, this is Luna Lindsay on Thinker of Thoughts. Jonathan Streeter. Maybe hope I can do him a little bit of justice here. Jonathan is just so articulate, and so is Luna, and they're talking on the undue influence, I believe, here that is used, mind control, basically, within the church. Let's take a look at what Jonathan and Luna are discussing, just at least briefly here, before I get into showing some stuff about Gospel Topics essays that I've done, and some massive contradictions. Actually, I was just going to show the evidence right in the Gospel Topics essays in the scriptures. Well, here, let's hear Luna. She's written a book on mind control utilized in the church.
All right, we want to welcome you back to our next video in a series looking at methods of control and thought reform that are employed and undue influence in General Conference. It's been a while since we've had a chance to take a look at these talks. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus, but it's great to have author Luna Lindsay back to help us go through this. How are you doing, Luna?
I'm doing good. How about you, Jonathan?
I'm doing great. The talk that I selected for today is one that it's not from the most recent conference. It's one from the session where we first started, which is in October of 2015. And as I listened to it, I really felt like it was something that really needed a bit of deconstruction because of just kind of the intense emotional appeal that the topic has. And that's the talk called Behold Thy Mother by Jeffrey R. Holland. Can you give us just, what are some of the things that you thought when you first saw this talk?
It's fairly typical of a lot of the talks that they give every so often, at least once a year, about motherhood. So I wasn't really surprised by much, other than there's one story he tells that kind of shows a bit of a shift in direction of the church. Overall, as a feminist, I think my biggest reaction was on that level of this sort of narrow range that they define women and motherhood. And while he does very briefly acknowledge exceptions, I don't think he spends enough time on exceptions. So my first thought really was with the pain of so many women who, like me, haven't always fit the motherhood role exactly the way the church defines it, and also people who don't have good relationships with their parents. So we can talk more about that as I guess we look at the talk. So.
All right. Well, let's not delay any further. I'm just very glad that you're able to help me work through this, because I think there's a perspective in terms of being a woman in the church, having those expectations of being a mother on here, that as men, we're really kind of blind to that, and we really don't have a way to frame or to understand that. And so I appreciate you taking the time to be with us here.
Yeah,
all right, so let's see here. I'm going to try to skip forward a little bit because he just does some kind of self-congratulatory stuff at the top. Let's see if we can get right to his top.
Okay.
Prophesying of the Savior's atonement.
All right, I think I missed it a little bit.
Miller Rendlin and their wives.
Okay.
The sweetest association they could possibly imagine. Prophesying of the Savior's atonement, Isaiah wrote, He hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. A majestic Latter-day Vision emphasized that Jesus came into the world to bear the sins of the world. Both ancient and modern scripture testify that he redeemed them and bore them and carried them all the days of old. A favorite hymn pleads with us to hear your great deliverer's voice. Bear, born, carry, deliver. These are powerful, heartening, messianic words. They convey help and hope for safe movement from where we were to where we need to be, but cannot get without assistance. These words also...
I want to pause it right there and point out some things. There is this idea in people that study thought reform and undue influence that in any totalistic organization like this, you have two different levels of interaction. You have the membership level, idealistic, and then you have the leadership level that exploit the idealism of the membership level. Mm-hmm. And they do that by elevating certain concepts and then using those concepts in order to compel conformity or to entice members into conformity. Mm-hmm. And so if you just step outside of Mormonism and look at other, things that we would all agree are very controlling, the way that they use the Messiah, the way that they use Christ as a way to compel members to continue in devotion to the leaders, when Mormons look at other groups that do that, it's very obvious, and you say, oh, they're just using the idea of Christ in order to place themselves in the God role or in the Christ role and compel them to obey that. And the way that Mormonism does it, or the way that he's speaking right now, runs the risk of doing that, because the first thing you do is you appeal to the idealism by, in this case, invoking imagery of a Savior, imagery of Christ in particular. And then the next part, the clincher of that, is then you tie it to conformity with the group expectations. Do you see that happening in the language he's using here as well?
Yeah, although there are a lot of talks where they do that much more. So this is sort of hinting at what the members will be used to hearing, and sort of leveraging what they've spent a lot of time developing in other talks much more deeply. But there is also in any abusive system, and I can't say for sure about church leaders necessarily in terms of what they actually consciously are aware of and what ideals they actually genuinely believe in. But in any abusive system, there is this sort of double-edged sword where the membership is hearing love and nurture and help and lift and be Christ-like, and the membership thinks that the entire system is all about that, when in fact there are at least some people in leadership, undeniably, I don't know about Holland specifically, but there are some people at every level of leadership, local all the way up, who aren't playing by the same rules as everyone else. They are abusive, narcissistic people who they're taking advantage of the fact that there is a body of membership that are trying their hardest to live up to those ideals, but that particular leader themselves are not. And it actually makes people softer and easier to manipulate. So,
yeah. And I think a lot of that is not done consciously. They've reframed what love is. And so you have the concept of tough love, or, the idea that we're going to do this for your greater good in the long term. And so that's why, disciplinary courts in the church are called courts of love. Right. And there's a little bit of an appeal to an Orwellian idea when, the torture scene at the end of 1984 is done in the ministry of love.
Right.
Something he says here at the part where we just paused it really struck me, and that's...
Okay, so you can check out Thinker of Thoughts on that and get the rest of it. Jonathan Streeter and Luna Lindsay, really articulate. They know what they're talking about, and I think they do a great job of analyzing methods of coercion or thought reform, as he is mentioning there. I will say that it's my strong impression that Jeffrey Holland absolutely knows what he's doing, that he is in the society, that he knows what's going on. He uses NLP regularly in his talks. He can be a little pathetic as an actor, but he's very convincing to a lot of people. So if you're not familiar with neurolinguistic programming or other persuasive technologies, probably got to look into it. Anyway, here we are in the Race and Priesthood Gospel Topics essay found on LDS.org. Look at that happy couple of black people in front of a temple. What is that image telling us? Everybody can go to the temple now. And so I've done a few exposés on this particular essay, which it's apologetics. It's not a fair and balanced essay by any means, which happens to be the case with all of the Gospel Topics essays that I can recall. But what I'm just going to do here is just show some absolute lies. Down at the bottom here, we've got this. The Church Today. This is part of the essay, which are approved by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, as is stated in the preface there. So I'm just going to hit a little highlight or two here. It says, today the Church disavows the theories advanced in the past that black skin is a sign of divine disfavor or curse, or that it reflects unrighteous actions in the premortal life. A premortal life. That's casting question on the premortal life, pre-existence almost, by calling it a premortal life. That mixed race marriages are a sin, or that blacks or people of any other race or ethnicity are inferior in any way to anyone else Church leaders today unequivocally condemn all racism, past and present in any form. Okay, so, going to 2 Nephi chapter 5. Go to verse 21 here and see how well that supports what these church leaders have to say. And he, meaning God, had caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, that they had become like unto a flint. Wherefore, as they were white, and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. So, who did it? The Lord. So, who's the racist? The Lord. And thus saith the Lord God, I will cause that they shall be loathsome unto thy people, save they shall repent of their iniquities. And cursed shall be the seed of him that mixeth with their seed. For they shall be cursed even with the same cursing. And the Lord spake it, and it was done. So if you condemn racism, you condemn God, the Lord, because the Lord caused a skin of blackness to come upon them as a curse. Whereas we just read that the brethren are telling us through the essay writers that it is not a curse. They explicitly said, not a curse. But they deny the scriptures, which they also, of course, ignore. Let's look at Alma chapter 3. All right. I think about verse 4 is about a good place to start here. It's a quickie. Verse 5. 6. And the skins of the Lamanites were dark, according to the mark. Does that sound like Cain, the mark of Cain? According to the mark which was set upon their fathers. Oh, I might add that used to hyperlink over to the part where it talks about the mark of Cain in Genesis, or the book of Moses. So, and the skins of the Lamanites were dark according to the mark which was set upon their fathers, which was a curse upon them because of their transgression and their rebellion against their brethren who consisted of Nephi, Jacob, Joseph, and Sam, who were just and holy men. And this was done that their seed might be distinguished from the seed of their brethren. In case you saw my video on the E. Potter, who says that it's all metaphorical. How do you distinguish them by metaphor? No, Potter, you are drinking the Kool-Aid. That they might be distinguished from their brethren, that thereby the Lord God might preserve his people, that they might not mix, and consequently believe in incorrect traditions which would prove their destruction. Okay. And thus it came to pass that whosoever did mingle his seed with that of the Lamanites did bring the same curse upon his seed. Doesn't sound too metaphorical to me. Anyway, a curse, a mark, skin of darkness, skin of blackness. And once again, what we see is that they were completely and totally dishonest with us. In case we have forgotten what we just read, it says, under the Church Today, found on LDS.org, in the Gospel Topics essay on race and priesthood. Today, the Church disavows the theories. Did that sound like theory? It said it was the word of the Lord and the deed of the Lord that he cursed them. The theories advanced in the past that black skin was a sign of divine disfavor or a curse, Now, as far as theories go, what we've got is the next part where it says that it had something to do or was justified basically by unrighteous actions in the premortal or a premortal existence, as it says. In other words, brethren such as Orson Pratt, the first that I recall reading this from, although we hear it more from Bruce McConkie and Mark E. Peterson in quotes, justify God cursing people in this life for something they had when they hadn't done anything wrong. In the case of the Negroes, necessarily being cursed that they couldn't have the priesthood, and this was justified by their premortal actions. So that's where theory comes from, but they kind of obfuscate things there. Then, of course, at the end, they condemn all racism, past and present, and what we see here is that it was the Lord God who spake, and it was done. So, complete and total dishonesty there. Watch the video, like race and truthfulness video I did, or it's also included in the awesome Anti-Mormons speak on the fictional origin of the Book of Mormon. And a few more. Now, how about the DNA issue? So I've done a few on that. And what I wanted to note there was that they lie again, blatantly. See if I can come up with this pretty quickly here. I had it sit, but it's moved a little bit. And what it tells us here is that the problem, obviously, the primary ancestors of the American Indians obviously didn't carry Israelite DNA, which has been a problem for the church. So in here, as far as them lying, I'm not going to go into the whole subject matter here, but what it tells us is that that the Book of Mormon provides little direct information about the cultural contact between the peoples, blah, blah, blah. And what I'm looking for is the part where it basically says, okay, here it says that, they weren't the predominant. They use a lot of fancy words. Well, predominant, majority. They try to make it sound like, there's a little less Israelite DNA there. Fact is, we got, 199 out of every 200 people tested that's Native American shows they came from Siberia. That's not just a majority. That is a wipeout. And we really don't have evidence that people came from Israel at the time. So, I want to show here where it says specifically that the Book of Mormon doesn't say that Lehi's family was inheriting a virgin land, although Jeffrey Holland says they were. And I had this queued up, so. The Book of Mormon provides little direct information about the cultural contact. Okay, consequently, I want to find this quickly. The Book of Mormon itself, however, does not claim that the peoples it describes were either the predominant or the exclusive inhabitants of the land they occupied. Okay, so they try to weave a new theme here, contrary to what we have in the Book of Mormon and have always been taught, that the, Lamanites were the principal ancestors of the American Indians, which they also took out of the preface to the Book of Mormon. And they want to say that they disappeared into a vast pre-existing population. Of course, these people that came across from Siberia came like 15,000 years ago and were not washed away by Noah's mythical flood. But that's not what I want to get into here. What I want to show is that the Book of Mormon really does weave that narrative. So here we are in 2 Nephi, chapter 1. The land of liberty, the chosen land. And in videos I've done on this and shown what Holland had to say, just extrapolating on what the, Book of Mormon says and so forth, on them being alone here after the floods had washed them away. Okay, so Lehi has a vision in which the Lord covenanted with him that it should be a land for the inheritance of my seed. Yea, the Lord hath covenanted this land unto me and to my children forever, and also all those who should be led out of other countries by the hand of the Lord. Wherefore I, Lehi, prophesy according to the workings of the Spirit which is in me, that there shall none come into this land, save they shall be brought by the hand of the Lord. Wherefore this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring. So only people got here that were brought by the hand of the Lord. That means slaves. Black slaves, which everybody knows about. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of white slaves from Europe, which our history has purposely obfuscated for an agenda that they have that actually can be checked out. And don't be fooled by euphemisms dealing with indentured servitude. Okay, wherefore this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring, and it so be that they shall serve him according to the commandment which he hath given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them, wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity. If so, it shall be because of iniquity. For if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes, but unto the righteous it shall be blessed forever. And behold, it is wisdom that the land should be kept as yet from the knowledge of other nations. For behold, many nations would overrun the land, that there would be no place for an inheritance. Well, that's pretty clear. Lehi is stating right there, and it's being restated here by Nephi, that evidently they did have some sort of exclusivity upon the land, and that the American continents, were being kept from the knowledge of other nations because they would be overrun. But the church is saying that they already were overrun with these people that are Nephites and Lamanites, merged with and disappeared into a vast population so that their DNA disappeared. Seeing a little problem there? Obviously, Lehi is going on the assumption that nobody else is there, which is not only assumption that the Lord covenanted with him that he would keep it that way, private, just for them. Wherefore I, Lehi, have obtained a promise that in as much as those whom the Lord shall bring out of the land of Jerusalem shall keep his commandments, they shall prosper on the face of this land. And they shall be kept from all other nations, that they may possess this land unto themselves. That they may possess this land unto themselves, and they shall be kept from all other nations. And if it so be that they shall keep his commandments, they shall be blessed upon the face of this land, and there shall be none to molest them. So, that was the Gentiles that came and molested them later, not other Siberian people that came across the Bering Strait after the Ice Age, and the seas were lower, long before Adam left the garden and started wearing clothing. Nor to take away the land of their inheritance, and they shall dwell safely forever. Well, how does that go with what they said in the Gospel Topics essay? Which stated that this was actually not the case, that there's nothing in the Book of Mormon that even, tries to tell us that they had it to themselves or even predominant as far as a population. And this says exactly the opposite. So either our essay writers and the First Presidency are unaware of what is stated in the Book of Mormon, obviously not the case, or they are deliberately deceiving us with outright lies. Well, so much for integrity, huh? And so that's what we have from the apologists that represent the church officially in this approved essay, approved by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12. You can find that in the preface. Unless they've changed that by now too, but I've got that in another video, so we can document that right out of my own videos on that. And the awesome Anti-Mormons Speaking Out videos, probably my best one on that. It used to be called, 33 Things You Got to Put on the Shelf to Believe the Book of Mormon, which is still out. This is just revamped, and they're both some of my more viewed videos. So, church apologists. Honest? I think not. Alright, we have time for a little McCraney here. Let's at least get a little bit of McCraney before the dawn breaks. Alright, Shawn, exposing Book of Mormon translation errors, or should we say things that make it obvious that it wasn't done by a heavenly being revealing absolute truth. Alright, let's go, Shawn. I introduced him briefly before in the first part here, just a little bit. He was a returned missionary, all that sort of a thing. He's now involved with Christianity. He does a fantastic job on Book of Mormon issues and church history as well, certain aspects at least. Here we go. This is his scientific speciality. Besides that, he's pretty good to watch.
All right, last week we presented some troubling changes in the most corrected book on the face of the earth, the Book of Mormon. Tonight, let's examine some problems the Book of Mormon narrative contains. We showed you last week things that were changed, literally corrected in this book that supposedly came from God's mouth to Joseph's eyes to Oliver Cowdery's hand. But let's first look at what Steve Conley has called some slips of the tongue in the Book of Mormon. Now, Conley suggests that instead of seeing the actual words on a piece of parchment appear before his eyes in a hat, that Smith was narrating and coming up with the stuff as he went along, probably from an outline, and that when he made a mistake in his narrative, he would fix it, and it would be recorded in the narrative. So let's give you some examples. Mosiah 7:8 reads, "They were again brought before the king and were permitted, or rather commanded, that they should answer the questions." So if it was a direct revelation from God, why would God say that they were permitted, or rather permitted, they were commanded, why would he make that change midstream like Joseph did? Another example of this is in Alma 5:10. Listen to this. Alma says, "I have never known much of the ways of the Lord and his mysteries and marvelous power. I said I had never known much of these things, but behold, I mistake. For I have seen much of his mysteries and marvelous power." So he totally changes his mind in the very thing he was saying. That wouldn't happen if it was a translation from a hard copy of gold, or if it was Joseph Smith actually reading words from God and giving them to Oliver. It happened because he had an outline and he was making up the story as he went, and he corrected himself right then and there. Alma 24:19 says, "And thus we see that they buried their weapons of peace," or they buried their weapons of war of peace, for peace. So again, we have a correction right there in the text of this great Book of Mormon. In Alma 43:38, Joseph Smith dictated this, which Oliver Cowdery recorded. "They being shielded from the more vital parts of the body, or the more vital parts of the body being shielded from the strokes of the Lamanites." So this was totally coming out of Joseph Smith's head, and it's proven by these discombobulated sentences where he's kind of doing a stream of consciousness, and he's saying, "And therefore I stepped into the stream," or rather, I stepped onto the bridge that was covering the stream, because he was giving it to him. He was doing it, none of the other things. In 2 Nephi 5:15 of the most corrected book on the face of the earth, it reads, "And I did teach my people to build buildings and to work in all manner of wood and of iron and of copper and of brass and of steel and of gold and of silver and of precious ores, which were in great abundance." Then in the next verse, he says, and I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things, for they were not to be found upon the land. I mean, he did in the verse right before, he says there's gold and silver and precious ores which were in great abundance, and then the next verse he says none of it's found upon the land to build the temple out of. All right? The Book of Mormon says that the people of Zarahemla, they rejoiced when Mosiah said, hey, I have these brass plates, and they have your genealogy on them. And the Book of Mormon says the people of Zarahemla rejoiced. But in the Book of Omni, 117, it says that Mosiah could not understand the people of Zarahemla because their language had all become corrupted. And so how could they ever understand that their genealogy was on the brass plates and rejoice over it if they couldn't understand each other? We have clumsy writing found throughout the Book of Mormon. Let me give you one example. We'll get to the others as we come across them. For example, 2 Nephi 4:14 actually reads, "For a more history part are written upon mine other plates." For a more history part are written upon mine other... A more history part? Okay. Of course, we pointed out the anachronistic use of Jesus in the Book of Mormon, but all through it, it says, and his name shall be Jesus Christ. 600 years before Jesus is born, it says in the Book of Mormon, his name shall be Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, 600 years before Jesus was born, Greek wasn't even in existence. The name Christ is Greek. In the Book of Mormon, it would be like it's saying, and his name shall be Jesus Messiah. Jesus didn't have a last name. His last name wasn't Christ. They act like it was Jesus Samuelson or something. Jesus Christ is his title. And it wouldn't have been Christ because the Greek language didn't exist 600 years before his birth. And so it would be Jesus Messiah, and that's still just a title. So
I would differ from Sean here. Jesus is also Greek. It's the same word that was translated as Joshua from the Old Testament. It's just that the New Testament was written in Greek. So maybe since the people actually probably spoke Aramaic, although the scriptures were in Hebrew, his name may have been Yeshua or Yehoshua. Obviously, Sean's right. Nobody's going to name their child Messiah. Not if they want him to live very long.
Another great mistake. The Book of Mormon also says that Jesus would be born at Jerusalem, which is the land of our forefathers. The phrase at Jerusalem is used all through the Book of Mormon, and it's speaking of Jerusalem specifically. Where was Jesus born? He was born in Bethlehem. So important is this that in the Old Testament, Micah prophesies that the Messiah will come from Bethlehem. It's a very specific place. Is it Jerusalem? No. Is it right next to Jerusalem, like Salt Lake City's right next to Murray? No, not right next to. And so it's a specific place, and it was so specific, God wanted it to be specific because that's where the Messiah would come from. Yet the Book of Mormon says he would be born at Jerusalem. The Book of Mormon claims that Nephi and his family left for Jerusalem to sail to the New World in the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, the king of Judah. Now listen, this is a real zinger. The Book of Mormon says in the first reigning year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, Lehi and his family left to go toward the Promised Land. But if Nephi and his family left in the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, how would Nephi later in the Book of Mormon be able to report that Jeremiah was cast into prison? Why do we ask? Because Jeremiah being cast into prison didn't happen until the 10th year of the reign of Zedekiah. So they left in the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, and they traveled through the wilderness, and they built boats, and they took off. And then 10 years later, after they had left, Scripture reports that Jeremiah was thrown in prison. How would that be recorded in the Book of Mormon? They would have had no knowledge of this. They left the place. And then there's the Book of Mormon's disguise problem. And this isn't that big of a deal. You can read it a lot of different ways, but there is a prophet named Abinadi in the Book of Mormon, and he ticks off a king named Noah because he's preaching repentance to the people. And Noah wants to kill Abinadi. So Abinadi takes off and hides for 2 years, and then he comes back. And this is what Mosiah 12:1 says. And it came to pass that after a space of 2 years that Abinadi came among them in disguise, that they knew him not, and began to prophesy among them, saying, Thus has the Lord commanded me, saying, Abinadi, go and prophesy unto this people. So this is what it's saying. The guy they wanted to kill him. He put on a disguise. He went back, and when he preached to him, he said, the Lord told me to come before you and say, Abinadi. What's that? What's the disguise for? Then there is a point we have already mentioned, and that the Book of Mormon is that they were Jews, and they were supposed to keep the law of Moses. 2 Nephi 5:10 says, and we did observe to keep the judgments and statutes and the commandments of the Lord in all things according to the law of Moses. Nowhere in Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon does it anywhere mention Passover feasts, observance or celebrations, sabbatical feasts, jubilees, purification rituals, other feasts, or circumcision. It's nowhere in this Jewish text. And yet that one passage says we did keep it all. Now listen carefully. Some Mormons try to defend and say that Mosiah 2:4 clearly shows that they did observe the law of Moses. This is what it says in Mosiah. It says in the Book of Mormon, they also took the firstlings of their flock that they might offer sacrifices and burnt offerings according to the law of Moses. That singular passage is what Mormons use to say, see, they did. But here's the problem. Under the law of Moses, the firstling of every flock was considered as already belonging to God, and therefore could only be used as a peace offering, never a burnt offering. And so what Joseph, not knowing these intricacies, he just threw in, and would they use him as a burnt? A Jew would never do that because their law would not permit it. So we can see that these errors are huge. A Jew would never do it. Major faux pas, Senor Smith, major for Jewish people. Another embarrassing mistake in the Book of Mormon was the Nephite people were supposedly so impressed with Nephi the king, they made a decree that all kings thereafter would be called Nephi. Jacob 1:1 tells us about it. Wherefore the people were desirous to retain in remembrance his name. And whoso should reign in his stead were called by the people 2nd Nephi, 3rd Nephi, and so forth, according to the reigns of the kings, and thus they were called by the people. But the very next king was named Mosiah. And no kings thereafter in the Book of Mormon are ever named Nephi. And then we have the brother of Jared mistake. We're getting to it. Ether 3:15, God says to the brother of Jared, and remember Joseph Smith is writing a parallel to the Bible, never have I showed myself unto man whom I've created. That's a quote. Yet in the Doctrine and Covenants, 107:54, Joseph Smith says the Lord appeared to Adam, showed himself to Adam. So we have a complete contradiction there. And we also have Joseph Smith saying the Lord appeared to him. Joseph made another boo-boo on that one. And then we have the word adieu. That is a French word. Adieu makes itself into the text of the Book of Mormon. Now, Mormon defenders say, well, as a translator, Joseph had the liberty to use whatever word would fit what he was translating.
Keep in mind, French did not exist during the time of the Book of Mormon.
I would agree. If he was translating from a set of gold plates and was just looking at them and he knew how to do it and he saw a word that was tough and I think I'm going to have to use French here to say goodbye, adieu, and put it in, that would make sense. But if he's reading off writing coming from God in a hat that's telling him what to say and Oliver's recording it, it means God chose to use adieu. God is telling him to use the word until. I tell ya, I suppose it's possible. Maybe God was separate. I mean, where does it end? And so finally, let's look at the biggest farce in the world in terms of mistakes in the Book of Mormon. And that is, it makes you wonder how any woman running for president of the United States and is going to govern our country could believe this stuff. What am I talking about? The Jaredite barges. In the Book of Ether, in the Book of Mormon, it claims that God confounded the language of the Tower of Babel. By the way, I looked it up. It's Babel. And at that time, there at the Tower of Babel, God told Jared and his brother, flee and go. And so they did. And the brother of Jared, Joseph later tells us his name was Mahonri Mori Ankamer. Anyway, God told Mahonri Mori Ankamer to build 8 barges. And this is how the Book of Mormon describes these barges, which are going to cross over the Pacific Ocean from the Tower of Babel's area and land in the Americas, it says. And they were small, and they were light upon the water, even unto the likeness of a fowl upon the water. They were exceedingly tight, even that they would hold water like unto a dish. And the ends were peaked, and the length was the length of a tree. So what we have is a tree-length, football-shaped thing. That's really about, and I've seen pictures drawn by Mormon people who say it was like a football-shaped thing. It was covered in animal skins. Mahonri Mori Ankamer made 8 of them, all right? Now, you got that glorious description. The Book of Mormon says a furious wind, in Ether 6:5, then blew, and for 344 days it blew, and these barges landed in the Americas. If that wind pushed those barges just 3 knots, that would mean about the speed you could walk. They would get to the Americas far sooner, and in fact they would circle the globe with a furious wind pushing that strong. And they were light, and they were floating upon the water. But what makes the story even more ridiculous is that these barges acted like submarines. Animal skinned, they would go beneath the ocean during storms, still cruising along. And then it gets better. The Lord forgot to light the inside of them, and he forgot to make a way for the people inside of them to breathe. This led Mahonri Mori Ankamer to go before the Lord and say, "Oh Lord, there's no light in them we cannot breathe." Yes! And so the Lord touches rocks that glow. Remember, Joseph's looking in a hat. The Lord touches rocks that glow, and then he tells them, he changes the code on how to build a skin barge, and he says, put a hole in the top, and then he also says, and I'll allow you to put a hole in the bottom. So these footballs have a hole in the top, they have a hole in the bottom, they're cruising through the Pacific Ocean with people and animals inside.
And bees. Yeah. So, not only is Shawn very credible, he's also pretty good to watch. So we've seen a number of our anti-Mormonism Mormon truthers on here, and we've seen what the church apologists do. Now, although we're not perfect people and we occasionally make a mistake or a slip-up, what we saw was a consistent pattern of deliberate deception among the church apologists, and especially noteworthy is that we find it on LDS.org in essays, as they are called, which are nothing short of polemics, apologetics, one-sided, not at all the sort of balanced thing they inferred we would find, practiced by Joseph Smith, John Taylor, and others. We've seen that this has been a pattern from the times of Joseph Smith, that obviously are like germs that infect us, working for Satan. Or in the words of the Jehovah's Witnesses leaders, mentally diseased minions of Satan seeking to infect those in the flock. This is typical mind control. Please watch some of my mind control videos and some of what Chris Johnson has to say and what some other people have to say, like Lizzie, who I feature on my latest one that's solely devoted to mind control, not the one on seminary. I'm not talking about the seminary one, but the seminary one is really, really revealing of things that the brethren say to the teachers within the manuals, instructing them how to shape the way the young people think. Of course, not informing them of the malevolent intentions there. Also, if you watch my first vision, 9 versions of the first vision, you'll see another example that I didn't even mention. Where in the teacher's manual, they tell the teacher how to lead the people away from any discussion that is concerned with the lack of historicity of the first vision, which might be brought up by members who have some sort of a clue as to the fact that there was no 1820 vision, nor were there 1820 revivals in Palmyra. Well, I'm going to wind it up there. Share this with some people. Be sure and hit the comments if you think of something you'd like to say, and if you haven't subscribed, of course, take care of that. Thank you so much. Like button's an easy one too. Try to do everything we can to get this in front of more people. And having said that, maybe I should figure out how to use Twitter or be effective on Facebook. Incognito. Have a great Saturday, and take it from there. Mormon Truth out on the Dodgy Game channel.